Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be reading chapter 13 and 14 in this video. And of course, we are reading the Essenes, Children of the Light, and this was written by Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentis. So in part 4, we are focusing on the beliefs of the Essenes, and what was the other category? Their beliefs and... let me see, I had it in my mind and I lost it. So, Essene knowledge and beliefs, and that's what part 4 is. So, chapter 13, we're going to read about the Essene libraries. We knew that Qumran had a fine library and wanted to get Daniel's impression of it. Joanna asks, were you familiar with the library in Qumran? Daniel says, yes, I visited it many times. As I was working on a general history of the Essenes, my researches took me there quite often. The library at Hebron was limited, and any serious research would have to be done at Qumran. My longest stay was for a period of about 6 weeks. That was a sweet time in the peak of my years, and the time flew by like 6 days. It was high summer when I was there, and the flowers in the gardens were particularly beautiful and heavily scented that year. It was a good year for the gardens, and for me also. Usually, my visits were shorter, perhaps a week or 10 days. I would complete my current area of research and go home to Hebron to absorb the new material into my work. Joanna, is it a big library in Qumran? Daniel says yes, in a large building with a number of windows. There was good light for the scholars, and light is important for those who work with the scrolls, some of which are old and faded and discolored, so that reading them is more demanding on the eyes. The scrolls were arranged on shelves, some wrapped to protect them and some not. Many had handles, some quite old and ornate, but some did not. Joanna, was this library all on one floor? And Daniel says no, there was an upper floor, but this was only part of a floor, open in the middle with railings, so you could look down and see who is below. It was a fine library, but not so fine as the library in our community near Alexandria. Joanna, did you ever visit that community? Daniel, yes, but I only managed to do so twice during the whole of my lifetime. The journey was a long one, and I had other duties which made it difficult to be away from Hebron for so long. The library at our community at Lake Mareotis near Alexandria was the finest one I have seen, even bigger than Qumran. It was a large building with windows right along the south side. Outside, there were awnings, so you could adjust the amount of light coming through each of the windows. And all along the south wall were tables for the scholars to sit at. It was a most practical place to study. The tables had deep, half-rounded channels in them, so that the handles of the scrolls were put down into these when one had unrolled it to the desired place. This was a simpler arrangement to that at Qumran, and I preferred it. The other 3 sides of the building were occupied with shelving right up to the ceiling. There were special ladders with broad platforms instead of rungs, so you could stand comfortably at any height. These ladders had wheels upon them, so they could be moved along the line of shelving. And I think a lot of us have seen that. When you've got a library that's got, floor to ceiling books, you can see that there's a ladder and it's on wheels and it goes across the actual library, which I've always loved and I've always wanted. The shelves were divided off so that 5 or 6 scrolls could be stored in each compartment. All the compartments were labeled and numbered, and a central index told you where the scroll you wanted was to be found. Unlike Qumran, all the scrolls here had good handles, even the most recent copies. There was much copying in our libraries, so that all 3 main libraries had most of what was really important, in case any library was destroyed or accidentally damaged by fire. Joanna, you mentioned 3 libraries. Where is the 3rd library? And Daniel says at Damascus. So I only visited it once, but it was a wasted journey. Okay. They had little that I had not seen before, except some minor Persian and Arabic sources. Nor was the library there as well organized and as well run as those at Qumran and Alexandria. Altogether, my visit there, after a long and tiring journey, was a disappointment to me. My only consolation was that it showed how thorough my researches had already been, since so little new material turned up there. Joanna: so were all three libraries more or less identical in the books they held? Daniel says the main texts to which we all referred were common to all three, but each library had some local sources as well. Each of the other communities also had a small library of its own, except for Mount Carmel, which had a large library. But this was a teaching library and not a research and copying center, so I did not consider it to be a main Essene library as the other three were. I also wanted to explore the source of all this knowledge, so I asked Daniel where all these scrolls came from. Daniel says some from the Kalu, but most we found ourselves. Most of the large communities had one person who traveled constantly in search of new scrolls. We put much effort into this gathering of knowledge, for it was most important to us. The Kalu stressed that much knowledge was circulating in the ancient world in one tradition or another. We respected insight and wisdom from whatever source it came. There were no traditions that we were not willing to learn from. We might not agree with all their conclusions, but at least we were prepared to give them a fair and open-minded hearing. The Kalu also told us that things would change. Men would become intolerant, more focused on their own tradition to the exclusion of all others, and that the danger in this was that old and valuable knowledge from other traditions would be willfully destroyed. It was part of our task to overcome this tendency by gathering as many scrolls of real value as we could. And we copied the most important of these and made summaries of every scroll so that we knew where all the knowledge was stored. Joanna: tell me about these summaries. What were they like? Daniel: when a new scroll came into any of our communities, it was read through and a brief summary made of what it contained. Any sources referred to were listed at the end of the summary. This gave us clues as to what to look for in the future if any sources entirely new to us were given. We would hunt down promising texts wherever we could find them. Copies of the summaries were regularly sent to the main libraries, so that all of our scholars knew what knowledge we had and where it was stored. That would make it harder for the knowledge to be lost. Joanna: it sounds as if the hunting down of ancient scrolls was quite a major thing for you. And Daniel says yes, and some of our brothers were only hunters. They would travel and track down interesting scrolls but never have time to study them. As soon as they had delivered the latest precious haul of texts, they would be off again to hunt down some more. This was not my way. I was the patient scholar, like a spider sitting in the middle of the web and trying to make sense of it all. Yet, I think they must have had more interesting and more colorful lives than mine. They would tell me of their travels and the excitement of being on the trail of something really old and rare. But they would also speak of the difficulties and dangers, and that made me value the quiet life I had at Hebron. Joanna: still, you did travel a little, to Alexandria and Damascus at least, and often to Qumran. And Daniel says it is true, but for most of my life I went to sleep at night in my own bed and was glad to do so. There were rewards, though, on my journeys. The meetings with like-minded people who cared about the knowledge as I did. Yes, that was good. Sweet times I remember in the summer evening in the gardens of Qumran, exchanging stories and meeting with old friends. And because so many Essenes did travel, there were always old friends visiting Qumran from all over our lands, and the meetings then were sweet, yes. And I loved the great crystal in the Qumran library also. I also took time to spend with it, like visiting a friend. Yes, a wonderful crystal, full of such power, it was a blessing to be near it. Joanna: did you ever think what might happen to these great libraries in the future? Daniel says yes, and I was anxious about the survival of all these precious things, all this knowledge. We were few, and the sons of darkness were many. We knew the value of these things, but there were many superstitious ones who despised all knowledge from outside the boundaries of our land, and would destroy these libraries if they could. All these wonderful truths, these most marvelous pearls of wisdom, were quite impossible for them because their minds were closed, and that makes me very sad. All right, so there's chapter 13, and now we will read chapter 14. This one's titled A Lay Brother's Credo. My hair keeps getting stuck on the back of my jacket. Okay, and this one, let's see, is a pretty short chapter. We're looking at maybe about 3.5 pages. By now, okay, so 14, A Lay Brother's Credo. By now we knew that Daniel could be full of surprises, but even so, the next session took us into new areas that we were not prepared for. Joanna, did the Essenes share similar beliefs? Did they all have the same perception of God, for example? Daniel, you must realize that the Kalu taught us that there are many perceptions of the divine and many paths to God. I have already talked of the 4 main strands which made up the Essene way. These strands gave us a broad and universal understanding that went far beyond the bounds of any one religion. Those who decided to become priests followed a more intense and restricted way, focusing upon Yahweh, but the lay brothers, such as I, were much more free in how we chose to pursue our spiritual path. All Essenes shared a great reverence for angels, and especially for the Elohim, very high angelic beings who stand above the level of archangel. The Elohim we saw as filling their places by reason of merit and not through being created great. We saw them as rising upwards from lesser angels or from the equivalent of human beings, through great ages of cosmic development until they reached that high level. Though there are many ways of perceiving God, I found the symbolism of light most helpful. I saw human beings as children of the light, dwelling perhaps for a while in the shadow of darkness, but coming home at last into the light, which is their birthright and their destiny. And every time he uses the word light, we're talking about light with a capital L. And I lost my place here. Okay, for in the heart of every human being burns the light of God's presence. And so at the deepest level, we are light, and returning to light is returning to our own fundamental nature. Even though a human being may have fallen into error, still the essence of God within longs for the light. And forgiveness and love are the ways in which light expresses itself within our lives and teaches us how to grow ever closer to God. God manifests as the light which illumines our path, and as the spirit within, which makes our inner development possible. As we live in joy and harmony and love, we live in the nature of God, and the light steadily expands within us. This expansion of the light anchors us in the true nature of our being. It nourishes us and allows us to unfold our talents and abilities as children of the light. Walking in the Spirit and inspired by the light, we become expressions of God upon earth. As Spirit merges with matter in us, we complete our task here and prepare to ascend to the spiritual realms. This is some of the most remarkable material that Daniel gave us. It places the teachings of Jesus firmly within a framework of Essene belief. The emphasis upon love and forgiveness and the Spirit are all here. Even the parable of the prodigal son is echoed in the words, "The essence of God within longs for the light." The section on the Elohim was also a key passage in helping us to see the Essenes as a whole. From this, we realized that they saw the universe as one vast meritocracy. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. The word merit with an O, crazy, like democracy, but meritocracy. That may not seem so dramatic to us, but we live in very different and more democratic times. Having these beliefs is not surprising. It is not surprising that the Essenes set up their communities in such a tolerant and merit-oriented way. However, to do so would have brought them into conflict with the rigid hierarchical society of their day. The Essenes were remarkably consistent. Their lives and social structures flowed naturally from their beliefs. This whole statement gave us the strange feeling that time was being transcended here, and that the Essenes were speaking to us directly in a way which has a remarkable relevance for our life here and now. This feeling was reinforced when I asked Daniel about the brotherhood. So Joanna asks, was the Essene brotherhood in touch with other orders or ancient brotherhoods? Daniel says, of course. That is why Essenes could move safely from our land to distant places. For example, up through all the Celtic lands to Britain. Whatever order you belong to, at the highest level, all orders become one, as the sides of the pyramid merge into a single point. All sages are of one heart, knowing that all life is one, and that all human beings share the same origin as children of the light, and the same goal, to merge with that light. We saw the triumph of light as something that must come, perhaps not for many years or even many centuries, but however long it takes, we saw the triumph of the light, the victory of God, and of love and truth, as sure and certain as the rising of the sun. All flows from the Spirit and from the light. We are children of the light, children of God, and light is our source, our goal, and our destiny. This view of things has become central to my life and was arrived at through study, discussion, reflection, and attunement over many years. When I saw that this had become so important for me, I fashioned a form of words to reflect it. And again, this is still Daniel speaking. So here's what he put together, a form of words to reflect it. I believe in the universe around me and in the presence within. I believe in the power of the Spirit. I believe in the triumph of the light. This is what I believe in. This is where I stand. Joanna. And do the Essenes as a whole believe in this? Daniel. I can only speak for myself, as each one can only speak for themselves. We enforce no common belief, no orthodoxy, and each one is free to choose their own perception of the divine. Indeed, each one has the responsibility of finding their own pathway to God. Their heart can help us, can guide us, but no conformity of belief can direct our footsteps to the light. Yes, there are universal meeting points within the Essene tradition, the Heavenly Father and the Earthly Mother, and the overarching peace. That is the foundation, but what each one builds upon this foundation is an individual choice. I have made my choice. This is where I stand. We had a definite sense here of reaching the bedrock of what Daniel believed in. Whilst Daniel was very fluid and flexible in the way he used his mind, there were clearly some fixed stars in his worldview, and this statement laid them out before us clearly and firmly. Many things in Daniel's life might be negotiable, but not this. His normal openness and flexibility made this statement seem all the more remarkable, especially the repetition of the words, "This is where I stand." Based on the written evidence, many people have perceived the Essenes as a rigid, dogmatic Judaic sect. What emerges from Daniel's testimony here is a very different picture. Yes, there was a foundation, a shared tradition to build on, but it still remained essentially an individual choice, at any rate for the lay Essenes like Daniel. That choice in Daniel's case had thrown up an interesting credo, but we were aware that this was his own personal credo, and not one that could be taken as applying to the Essenes as a whole. But to return to the session, I had spotted what I thought was an inconsistency and wanted to follow up with this. Joanna, you say that all life is one, but how do the Pharisees, the sons of darkness, fit into this? And that is one with a capital O. And Daniel says, I see all human beings as children of the light, sons and daughters of God. Some have chosen to move away from the light and become sons of darkness. But this is only for a moment or two in the eternity of God. When these sons of darkness turn again to the light, they will fulfill their destiny as children of the light. And love and peace will embrace them as surely as it embraces each and every one of us. God never turns away and rejects us, even if we choose to turn our faces from the light. And when we return to the light, there is great rejoicing amongst the angels. Daniel's statement here shows remarkable tolerance and represents a very different view to that expressed by the priestly scribes who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. This whole section was a surprise to us. We had assumed there would be a conformity of belief among the Essenes, and certainly there were universal meeting points, as Daniel put it. But ultimately, what they believed in was an individual choice, and that was quite unexpected. However, it is important to bear in mind that Daniel's experience was as a lay Essene, and the Essene priests, dedicated intensely to Yahweh, were clearly much more restricted. All right, so that actually completes not only chapter 13 and 14, but part 4 of this book. So we will start part 5 in the next video, and we're going to be talking about the secret core of Essene life. And the first chapter we're going to start out with, which is chapter 15, would be secrecy and security. And then chapter 16, the core group. So that's going to be our first 2 chapters, and that actually makes up part 5. Some of these parts are just, a few more chapters than others. But I think altogether there's 39. No, I was way off. We've got about 49 or 50 chapters to go. But again, they're broken up into so many different parts and they're so short. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really not. It's definitely not the longest book that we've read, that's for sure. Or the most complicated one at that. So thank you all so very much for joining me. I love you all so very much. And until I see you again, as I always say, because I mean it, take care of you, take care of those around you, and I will see you soon for our next few chapters of our book. Take care until then. Bye-bye.